Hi, I'm Judah Kupferschmidt, and for our presentation, Nate, Aiden, and I have decided to talk on cloning and its moral implications. Cloning is the replicating of an organism's genetics artificially to make a carbon copy of the organism or just some of its parts. So any living thing can be cloned. So far, cloning whole human beings have not yet been accomplished. However, cloning is practiced in agriculture and horticulture. Embryologist Hans Spemann was the first to think of cloning whole animals back in 1938. Embryonic cloning is artificially creating twin embryos from a single ovum. The first one that occurred was with a sea urchin in 1885. In 1993, this experiment was conducted on human embryos, which was unsuccessful. Nuclear transfer cloning is when the nucleus of an ovum is replaced by one of a donor. It was this kind of cloning that was used on a sheep in a Scottish laboratory in 1997. The successful clone was named Dolly. Many are positive about such biotechnology. The possibilities are that organs can be cloned and used to replace organs that are failing and can regenerate cells that were eaten away by disease. Some scientists see this as a possible cure for diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, kidney failure, etc. However, there are more than enough opposers of cloning. There are a lot of possibilities for evil as well. Cloning could fundamentally change the way we perceive the family and its functions. There would be a disconnect between parents and children, and people should not meddle with the genes of a potential human being. Cloning would also mess with a system that already works. This would also devalue the human being to just an expendable product. We would lose our respect for human life, and well, in many ways, we already have. Cloning also encourages the harvesting of fertilized embryos, which is abortion. The list of negative possibilities goes on, at least what many who fear cloning imagine. Some would even point to what they would call the Frankenstein factor, creating monsters of mass destruction. Although this seems to be a very far-fetched, fear-induced suggestion, fear towards human cloning isn't completely invalid. For all technology has been abused in one way or another. Ian Wilmot, the head scientist responsible for the success of Dolly, opposed the notion of human cloning, calling it offensive and ethically unacceptable. Christians have definitely put in their opinions and are largely among those who oppose cloning. There are some, though, who would dare to say that cloning is a way of stewarding the earth, saying that we are helping to repair our broken bodies. We, of course, as Christ followers, still believe cloning to be unethical because we believe experimenting on humans in this area of science is wrong. We definitely don't want to be closed-minded and oppose what could be potentially good, but at the same time, we want to evaluate everything from God's standard. And from here, I will turn it over to Nate.
To pick up where Judah left off, I'm going to be going through the scientific examination of the data and then the theological and philosophical implications of cloning. I want to start off by defining the three different types of cloning. The first and most accepted and really most valuable at this point in time form of cloning is gene cloning. Gene cloning is a natural biochemical reaction that is replicated by science. So it's a biochemical reaction that's already in your body that science is just replicating at a mass scale. It is, in a sense, like forcing cells to asexually reproduce and duplicate. It happens throughout every cell in the body and recreates an exact copy of the original genetic material. This form of cloning is very useful when it comes to research because it creates low-risk scenarios for experimentation. You could experiment on a patient without hurting them by experimenting on a genetic copy of their tissue. This one is, really good for lab type scenarios where scientists need to test how the human body might react to something without using an actual patient. The second form of cloning is very similar. It's called therapeutic cloning, which is used for surgery and other medical treatments. The way that works is the doctor creates cloned embryonic stem cells and then uses this base to create genetically identical cells to the damaged cells so that it can replace them. And you might be wondering, how does the doctor get a hold of the patient's embryonic cells? Well, the doctor recreates them using skin cells. So that's kind of a difficult process and a rather lengthy process. So this form of cloning is not as common and not as practiced just because of a lot of work that has to go into it. But that kind of leads me into the last form of cloning, which is called reproductive cloning. And when you talk about cloning, this is usually what people think of. This process takes the cells from the original organism and creates a genetic duplicate that is completely identical to the original, only younger. So like a good example of what this looks like is in Blade Runner, Star Wars, and Oblivion, other movies like that talk about cloning. It's when they take basically the genetic material of a person and then they recreate an embryo and then basically recreate that exact same person, but obviously they're not the same age. They start the process of growth from the very beginning. There's no way to skip to where you're presently at. Sort of like Jango Fett. But before we get into the theological and philosophical implications of cloning, I want to talk about the physical implications of reproductive cloning and what it would look like to clone someone. And obviously we haven't cloned humans yet, so we don't know the exact effects, but I'm pulling information from studies and experiments that have already been done on animals, and we can assume that humans would have pretty much the same response. And I think the best example is Dolly. Obviously, we talked about Dolly in class last week. There's even a picture of Dolly outside of Torrey Gray right now. Life Science magazine reported that in order to create Dolly, researchers needed to clone 277 embryos. That's a lot of embryos. And of all those embryos, only 20 were healthy enough to implant. And of those 29, only one survived until birth. So that's a lot of work and money and time only for one to survive until birth. And that's just until birth. But even after birth, in the early years, cloned embryos faced many failures. The animals born alive sometimes died prematurely. According to the National Human Genome Research Institute, sheep and other cloned mammals have had various organ defects, including heart, brain, and liver problems. Other reports suggest that issues with premature aging and increased birth size and immune system issues are highly possible with reproductive cloning. Cloning has the potential to cause health defects that will, in the long run, prove detrimental. A study by a group of French scientists showed that a 2-month-old calf cloned from the genes taken from the ear of an adult cow died after developing blood and heart problems. The genetic reworking done by scientists to bring the calf to life affected the calf's genes from maturing properly, causing the calf to die. And that's the problem. You may be wondering, well, if this is an exact clone, then it shouldn't have these health problems because I don't have those health problems. Like the person that's being cloned doesn't have those health problems. But in order to create the clone, they have to tamper with the genetics in the DNA in order to recreate those embryonic cells. And all that tampering, you can, as you can imagine, tampering with something's DNA is extremely fragile and can cause a lot of long-term effects. So obviously, with this, data in mind, it would be extremely irresponsible to clone humans. But we're talking about cloning as a concept, not necessarily cloning with today's technology. So what happens when the tech comes along that these are no longer health risks? Is it still immoral? Is it still unethical? Well, that's what I want to answer now. And there's a lot of Bible verses that talk about the sanctity of human life. And I could refer to those, but I'm sure Judah has already referred to the verse about being fearfully and wonderfully made in our mother's womb. And I think that is the core of the issue, is we're not taking into account the human life that's being created. God created humans to, man and woman to come together and to create a baby. It's a very sacred process that God outlines extremely early in the Bible, in Genesis, in fact. And, the process of a soul being put into a baby when a baby is born, we don't really think about how, magical and how wonderful that is, and what a huge blessing that, a man and a woman can come together and then create a new life. And God puts a soul into that new life, and that is a human being. That is such a sacred process. And, the world won't talk about that because, the world doesn't really value life. You can see that in the way that they view abortion. But since we view that, this whole cloning thing takes on what's happening here? We're cutting out that process. We're cutting out that marriage, that union that creates the baby, and we're doing it isolated. It's like we're saying, no, God, we don't want what you created. We want to do it our own way. And, the world loves doing this. You can look at same-sex marriage, and it's the exact same idea. It's, God gave us this wonderful gift of marriage, and people decided, no, we want to do it our way. And, I think it's a real Tower of Babel issue. It's sort of like our hubris is too big, and we want to just take and take and take, and we want to just do and do and do without ever thinking, what will be the implications of these advancements. So I think that is definitely still immoral, even if we were to have the tech to make it completely safe. Not to mention the fact that, this person is an exact copy, and, what if they don't want to be that way? You can't get consent from a clone. You really can't do that. And we don't know how a clone would feel about this. There's so many unanswered questions that we will only know once we have cloned someone. But those are not questions we want to hear the answer to, because they will most likely be bad. That makes sense. So I think that overall cloning is just not a good idea. And obviously I'm talking about reproductive cloning right now, and reproductive cloning specifically with humans, because other cloning methods are extremely helpful for science, extremely helpful for health, for maintaining human life. So it's really, cloning is this incredible power that, we've, sort of uncovered, and we can easily use it to build people up, to help people survive and maintain human life, or we can use it to degrade human life through cloning. But I don't want to hog the microphone. I'll hand this over to Aiden now and see what he has to say about cloning.
Okay, so we now want to talk about how should we as a church, what should the church teach in regards to cloning? Should it be something that we are excited about, look into? And because should it be something we even worry about, think about? And we definitely believe that cloning is something that we should think about, because it is on the horizon. And we believe that even though there is no proof of human clones existing just yet, we believe, the way that science is moving, and the way that life is with technology just always increasing, especially at the pace right now when just everything is becoming so crazy, you know, flying cars, everything. We have to look at a future where cloning human beings is very, very possible, and not even just possible, but likely to happen. So we know that cloning happened with Dolly the sheep. Now, should we as a church believe what? How do we even feel about cloning? You know, I've always thought that having a clone would be kind of cool. I've always actually wanted to fight my clone. I wanted to know if I'd win or not, or if my clone would win. Like, how would that work? I've also, I've also wanted to maybe kiss my clone. I don't know. I want to know if I'm a good kisser. No, that one's a little weird. But yeah, no. So like we've all probably imagined and had ideas of what you know, interesting ideas of what would it be like to have a clone. And also sometimes it'd be a good, you know, there could be good reasons to maybe want to have clones. But also we have to look at the moral implications. First of all, we have to know that we, as human beings, are fearfully and wonderfully made. God created all of us with a soul. He created all of us with a purpose, and He created all of us in His own image. And that is the first thing that, you know, that just anyone should be taught, is that you are special, you are loved, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made by, you know, the all-powerful Creator, God, and that is the first thing. The next thing that we should teach about cloning is that cloning is just man trying to play God in a way. You know, you know, when they make a clone, it's not God's creation. It's actually man's biological manipulation. So we have to look at it like that, and that is one reason that we stay away from it, because we as human beings are sinful. We make errors, and also just there would be so many trials and so many different issues that could happen when it comes to making a clone. And even when we're able to, one of the biggest questions that we have faced is when thinking about clones, even though there's no proof of human clones yet, is do human clones or do clones have souls? And honestly, we could not come up with an answer. However, we believe that you should treat them as if that they do. So, you know, we shouldn't exploit them, treat, you know, they don't exist yet, but if they were to, we shouldn't treat them as if they're second rate, anything like that. We should treat them as if they do have a soul, because the answer is we just don't know for sure if they do or not. We don't know if they can receive salvation or not. We are unsure of that because we don't know if they have a soul. And that is also one reason we actually believe that we should stay away from cloning, is because we don't know if that clone may have a soul and what implications that could have on, well, the human race and humanity in general, and what impact that might have going forward in everything that we do. So yeah, we definitely believe that we should stay away from cloning, and that morally it is wrong to clone, because it is, you know, God designed human beings with a purpose, and a grand purpose, and we as human beings that clone's purpose would be more so of human beings' experimentation. And we don't see that as morally good or even really acceptable, so that is why we believe that cloning is evil and should be something that should not be messed with or interfered with. And but we do have to think of a reality and a possibility of clones actually existing and communing with us. And in those situations and in those scenarios, we would say treat those clones as if, you know, they actually are real people, because, well, they kind of are. and treat them as if they have a soul, because even though we're not 100% sure as of right now if they do or not, we want to be able to be loving to everybody and be very respectful and just treat everyone loving, and and that would also include clones as well. But yeah, that is basically how we as a church view cloning and clones, and this is what we believe. We believe that, first of all, God created human being and human life as sacred. We are made in His image. He did not make a mistake with you, and He loves you so very, very, very much.